Classical guitarist Don Hlus has performed throughout Southwestern British Columbia as a soloist as well as a chamber musician, including performances with members of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, the Vancouver Opera Orchestra, the CBC Radio Orchestra, and the Borealis String Quartet. Although his formal training was on the classical guitar, Don's musical interests extend to include a wide variety of musical styles, including acoustic fingerstyle, jazz, world, flamenco, and Celtic music. Don Hlus was a member of the music faculty at Kwantlen Polytechnic University from 1993 to 2019, and he served as chair of the music department from 2012 to 2018. He was also the director of guitar and founder and artistic director of the Fraser Valley Acoustic Guitar Festival. After 26 years, Don is retired from academic life, which has allowed him to pursue other musical projects and opportunities close to his heart. Don currently works with his students at his private studio in Fort Langley, BC, and he is a member of the Canadian Music Festival Educators Association and the British Columbia Registered Music Teachers Association. He is currently completing an instruction book introducing music reading to young guitarists. He has been passionate and devoted to helping young musicians find and develop their own artistic voices. Says Don, "There is nothing more satisfying than working with students, whether they are just discovering music and the guitar for the first time, or fine-tuning their artistry and advancing their professional careers." I'm Adrian Verdejo, and this is my recent interview with Don Hlus from Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. So thanks for joining me today, Don. Happy New Year to you, and I'm very happy that you reached out to me. We hadn't seen each other for some time now, I think in person, but I know I had been wondering where and what you've been up to recently, so I was happy to hear about a lot of your recent work, both as an educator and as, I guess we can say, as a career advisor in a certain sense for developing classical guitarists and perhaps young musicians in general. So I do want to talk about all of those things today, but I guess before we get going, may I ask, how have you been? What have you been up to in these last couple of years since the pandemic and everything has been kind of topsy-turvy? But how is your practice going, your teaching studio? Do you have any performance projects on the go or any publications? Just curious.
Well, Happy New Year, Adrian, and thanks for having me. Honored to be here, and it's been a crazy couple of years, that's for sure. I think, as you know, 2.5 years ago, I decided to leave the university, and I had to admit that was a pretty bold step on my part, because at that point in time, I really wasn't sure what was happening with the program. But I just felt it was time to move on anyhow. I had been there for 26 years, and I had chaired the department for 6 years. And I actually really liked administration, and if I dare say, I think I was good at it. I think the challenge and the thing that I found particularly draining as chair was just the politics. We have certain ideas about what a university should be, but the reality is often very, very different. So I took the bold step of just going in a new direction, and then COVID hit, and that really kind of changed everybody's world, really. I think the downtime in some ways really helped me kind of reset and kind of evaluate, what was important to me. And I think more importantly is it allowed me time to really consider what it is I really wanted to do and how I wanted to contribute to the community and the world around me. Um, so, most people kind of look at that as, a big step. And, with COVID, it was very frustrating for a lot of people. But I kind of saw it as a blessing in many ways. You can't always control what's happening around you, but you can certainly choose how you respond to it. And I took advantage of, I guess, the downtime to, like I say, reassess what I was doing and change direction. So I think the thing that I've been focusing quite a bit on is career development for classical guitarists. I've certainly have been working with other people in other genres, but since that's my background, that's I guess the niche that I've focused in on. I feel like I can help people just because I've had that experience as a career. So that's my focus, as well as, I'm still teaching privately, which I thoroughly enjoy. I have a small studio, but it's, I get energized at the end of the day. And that's, when I'm finished teaching, I'm excited. And so it's nice to have that. But, my focus in my career has always been helping others find their spotlight. I've never been comfortable in the spotlight myself. It's just something I've never learned how to deal with. But I take a lot of pleasure in just seeing someone reach their goals, and it's very satisfying knowing that I've helped them along the way.
Absolutely. And, coming into sort of this new era of teaching and teaching online, and also sometimes meeting people, in person, but with masks, and precautions and so forth, it has really changed the whole medium, I think, of how we deliver our content, and certainly how it's received from the students' end. And I know there have been challenges with that on my end as an educator. I'm wondering, from your point of view, how have you adapted your practice since COVID and all this kind of, precautions that we're dealing with? Are you doing 100% online or some, partially distanced hybrid schedule? How are you managing?
Well, when COVID first hit, I think I know the BC Registered Music Teachers Association had given us guidelines and had recommended that we all go online, which I did. And my students were happy that, we could continue our studies. And there were certain things that were available to us that, you didn't really appreciate, I guess, when you're doing in-person lessons. So, for example, I would have the score in a PDF file and I'd be marking that. And then I could email the score after, and, they had a very clear idea about the things they needed to work on, which, in a lesson, I would let the student, mark their score and make notes. But I think they liked a little bit more detail, etc. When we were allowed to go back to teaching in person, I pretty much went full-time teaching in person, but, I had hand sanitizer at the door. Everybody had masks. I even had spare masks at the door in case someone forgot theirs. And, I had hand sanitizer in the studio, and I was cleaning it up in between students. Probably one of the biggest changes that I made was, rather than scheduling students back to back, I had actually put 15 minutes in between the students. So it made my days longer, and obviously it's less efficient, but I actually liked the break in between myself as an instructor. It allowed me to kind of reset and kind of shift to the next student. So, and I think I'll actually keep that, even, when this pandemic is over and we're allowed to go back to, our usual routine. I think that's a practice that I will adopt more so. Like I say, I just liked it because I felt like I was more present in the lesson. I still utilize online lessons as a backup for when, let's say a student they're not, feeling totally healthy, but they're not really sick, but they're not really sure. And, my students have been great in the senses that they'll contact me and they say, you know what, I'm not feeling the best. Can we do an online lesson today? And so I've utilized that. But the feedback from my students is that there is a huge difference between online lessons and in-person lessons. And particularly, one of the things that I've noticed is, and I've had a number of people say, I'm a beginning student, I teach online students, and I won't do that with beginners. I'll do that with intermediate and advanced students. But, just as you are well aware, just trying to do subtle shifts in positioning of the hands, for example, or, just moving the instrument, just those subtle things. I mean, you could spend 30 minutes trying to do something that you can do in like 4 seconds. So, the online lessons, it's great. I know there are some people who do that full time, even before the pandemic. That's all they did. For myself, I prefer the in-person lessons. I think there's an energy there that you just can't duplicate online. And I think a lot of people are discovering that, for example, in concerts. You had all these sort of Facebook concerts and in a concert, it's not just the performer, playing his music. It's a conversation. It's an exchange. And as much as the performer gives, the audience gives back. And that's just something that, you can't duplicate online. I mean, the record industry, tried to duplicate that for decades, his master's voice, right? The old record label. But that's just, you can't duplicate it. And I think a lot of people are are very tired of it now. And I think a big opportunity when this pandemic finally subsides is live music. I think is going to make a big return because people are discovering that they really miss it. I mean, we have it all over the place. We walk into a store, it's there. We walk into an elevator, it's there. We walk around with our iPhones and music playing. But that sort of energy of a live concert, that just can't be duplicated. And so I think that will be a huge opportunity for someone who's interested in concert promotion and the like. So
yeah, we're looking forward to getting back into person. And I was thinking about what you're saying with the lessons and those subtle things that we took for granted, and I guess one of the big ones is just the simple fact of being able to play and count together, just keeping time together and playing simple melodies or duets, which is so enriching and valuable to developing students. Again, eye contact, the simple, like you said, taking somebody's hands and moving them into position, or just kind of, like you said, adjusting the instrument. Despite all the advantages, it's those kind of human contact moments that we all really need, and that's why we go to real people for lessons and not just on YouTube. We can only get so far. So I totally understand what you're saying in that regard, and I do hopefully, I guess if there's a silver lining, is that maybe the public will really appreciate all of those elements of being back in person and sharing the concert experience together, and also, group lessons and ensemble playing, which is so dearly missed as well. Pivoting to your work as a sort of advising career advisor for developing classical guitarists, Don, this is something that I think is really so important for students to be thinking about, even from the very beginning of their musical education. And I can say from my experience that as a young guitarist, ambitious guitarist, I really went to music school open-mindedly, but without really a clear plan about how it was going to all pan out. I was just enthusiastic about learning and having the time and space to practice, and being around others that would benefit that and inspire me and give me some direction. But there was not the opportunity at least in the early part of my studies, to have a course, for example, or a specific mentor that would say, these are the steps that one should take, or these are the options at least that one can take in trying to carve out a professional kind of, a place as a musician, as a guitarist, and where even does a classical guitarist fit in sort of the landscape of the musical community. And these are big questions and things that through trial and error, some of us had to learn. I'm wondering, from your experience as a guitarist and educator, how and through what means you came to your position as an educator and as a mentor, and also in your 26 years at the college, and also studying as a private teacher, I should say, was that a passion that developed seeing students enter into the professional realm without a plan, or was it something that, was always kind of at the forefront of your goals, is to try to give students the tools to make a way for themselves in the musical world?
Oh, wow. Great question. And a very, very, very long answer. I guess I have to go back to my early 20s, because at that point in time, I was teaching 25, 30 students. I had not gone to university. And I thought to myself that I wanted to become a better educator. And I felt that the best way that I could do that was to become a better player. And so I returned to university actually when I was 26. So I was the old man of the class. And it had some advantages and disadvantages. I think the biggest advantage is I knew why I was there. And, having been at the university for a long, long period of time, I would encourage people to take a gap year after they finished high school. I would say probably 80% of them need the break. There's a few that really do know what they want to do, and that's great. But I found for the majority of students, whether, regardless of the institute, jumping right into a university program, I'm not sure is in their best interest. I think they should go, work for a year or travel or something. But, I was 26. I'd been out of school for a while. I actually studied jazz composition and arranging before that for a year. And I got to see the guitar from a very different perspective. And when I was studying jazz guitar, I was playing fingerstyle. And the fellow said, my technique was beyond theirs, and that I should find a classical guitarist and take some lessons. And that's kind of interesting, because when I was 10, I wanted to study classical guitar, but I ended up, studying sort of the pop rock guitar, and also kind of the acoustic fingerstyle of, artists like James Taylor or Jim Croce or, the musical group Bread or something like that. So I was more of that kind of the acoustic singer-songwriter kind of thing. And but anyhow, so when I returned to university at 26, I had a really good idea of why I was there. The other thing that I was very fortunate with is the fellow I studied with, Michael Stratt. He had a very good business mind. And I think I probably learned more about the music industry and the business of music from him, more so than actually music in some ways. I think my musical education really began after university, which is kind of bizarre. But now there were, there were two of us that were the first to graduate from the University of British Columbia with a performance degree. And that would have been 1991. So at that point in time, I think, one of two people in Western Canada that had that credential. And that very same year, coincidentally, Kwantlen College at the time announced that they were building a campus in Langley, and that one of the pillar programs was going to be music. And I applied, and again, because I was one of the few people who had that credential, I got the position. So I have found that it's sort of like, okay, you walk through a door and then, you begin to discover the other doors, but you won't see those doors unless you walk through that first door. So my first door was going back to university. And then that opportunity came, and the world has changed in 30 years. When I applied, it was a minimum requirement of a Bachelor of Music, preferably a master's. Well, now if you look at any of the job postings, they aren't just, a minimum of a master's and preferred a PhD. Now I'm seeing postings where they are just wanting a terminal degree, a DMA or a PhD. So, the world has shifted in a great way, in the sense of that there's a lot of people that are, going to school for guitar. That just didn't exist when I was younger. So it's really cool, but it's also, very competitive. When I was, teaching, which was my first love, I've never had aspirations to be an international, performer or anything like that. I remember even actually in my interview for Kwantlen, they asked what did I want to do in 5 years, and my first response was teaching. I didn't even hesitate. That's just maybe my ambition is a little bit different than a lot of players. I know a lot of artists, they want to become, well-known performers, and which is great. It's just that's never been my focus. So, when I was at the university, so the campus opened in 93, and then in 1995, the university was designated a university college, and we became a degree granting institution. And my thought was, well, they want us to, usually at a university, they like you to have a credential one level higher than the level you're teaching, so that if you're teaching under an undergraduate program, they want you to have a master's. And if you're teaching, graduate courses, they want you to have a PhD. So Now, at the time, there was a program we had similar to VCC. It was a foundation program, where what we learned in the first couple of years is there was a lot of talented individuals that just weren't prepared for secondary education, post-secondary education. And music is a little bit different because, if you want to go into engineering and build bridges, you don't have to know how to build a bridge to get in there. But in music, you have to have quite a bit of experience and education just to enter the program. So we had, I guess, redeveloped one of the programs, or actually I redeveloped one of our programs to help those students who are talented to acquire the knowledge and skills they needed to not just get into a program, but thrive. And I really liked doing that. I liked the curriculum work, and I ended up being on numerous curriculum committees throughout my university career. And so when we became a university college, I started thinking about, well, maybe I should go back and do my master's. And I had a number of colleagues, who were aware that I was considering going back to university, and they said, yeah, you could go back and get a master's in performance, and basically you're just playing a couple more concerts, but you kind of already know how to do that. Have you ever thought of doing something on the administrative side, and going into curriculum development, because you're a little odd, number one, and you really like doing this stuff. And I just kind of thought, I did. And so I ended up entering into a higher education program where I focused in on curriculum and program development in higher education. And I had no designs whatsoever of what this would bring me. It was something that was interesting to me, and I pursued it. Yes, there was the idea of getting that credential, but it was mostly, I was just interested in the topic. Well, a few years later, so I finished my master's in 2003, and in 2008, Kwantlen University College was again redesignated, and it became Kwantlen Polytechnic University. And the university had developed a few degree programs, but there was a mandate now that all the programs develop a degree. Well, guess what happened? That honor fell upon my shoulders to lead a team, and that wasn't an easy process. But we ended up launching our degree, I think, in 2012, and 2000, or it might have been 2011. I can't remember now, but so I mean, those were things where I know in my life where I took a step, not knowing what the other steps were after, but feeling confident or passionate about that first step. So I took the first step. You walk through the door, and that's when sort of other opportunities presented themselves, and I wouldn't have been able to take advantage of that if I hadn't taken that initial step. But I had no idea that these opportunities were coming. And as I mentioned to you before we got started, I think the instructor I had studied with, he was he had a really good business mind, and I learned a lot about the music industry through him. I just kind of looked around, and I saw a lot of my peers and colleagues at the university when I was studying that they were just really overwhelmed and stressed by, okay, I'm playing the cello, and What am I going to do? And most people, the default was, well, I'll do a master's. And, nowadays it's like, oh, now I'm going to do a PhD. And I mean, that would have been fine in the 60s and 70s. But, even in the case of the guitar, because that's a rather recent development in post-secondary education. I mean, if the position I left was advertised properly, there would have been 100 applicants. And with my credentials, I probably wouldn't have even been shortlisted. So, it's changed dramatically. There are so few teaching positions, which was a typical kind of career for a lot of people. You got a teaching position and you performed, and that was your career. I think those days, I mean, there are those opportunities, but they're very, very limited now. And like I say, if a position is properly posted, you're going to get 100, 150 applicants for one position. So, the question is that, okay, yeah, there's that one person that's going to get it, but what are the other 100 people going to do? And that's really where I became interested in career development, because the typical career progression for a classical guitarist, it still exists, but it's like for 1% of the people now, So like I say, what are the other people going to do? And if you look at artists that have changed the landscape, they were always doing things that were different. And sort of outside the accepted norm. And I think artists in particular classical guitarists, certainly not all, but many have kind of lost that sense of adventure and curiosity to do different things. And but to do different things is quite scary, and so that's where I felt like, that I could step in and help people find their path. And there's a lot more involved to it than just following your passion, for example, which is often what you hear, but that's only one sort of part of the story. So yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of how I came about to be interested in career coaching. And it was a need that I saw that, quite frankly, universities can't address. As you are well aware of, that, a university degree, 4 years, is generally between 120 and, most music degrees are like 126, 132 credits. And it's really tough. There's just not enough room in the program to begin to insert career development courses and music industry, because once you begin to displace other courses, then the development of the musician is compromised. So that's really, really difficult for a university program to wrestle with. I have a few ideas about how to do that now, but anyhow, it just seemed like that was a missing step for musicians, not just classical guitarists, but also, orchestral players. There's a lot more orchestral players than there are positions, and or pianists or what have you. So it just seemed like it was a huge need. And I know at the university I taught at, I was teaching an introduction to the music industry course and a business of music course, which was really kind of a career development course. And I was just, it's a part of, I guess, my life that I'm really fascinated with. And so again, I've walked through the door not quite knowing what's happening on the other end. But I've always learned that, to trust that first step, even though you can't see beyond the door.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Don. And it seems like, given your diverse skill sets and interests, and you mentioned you had sort of a strength in administration, which I think is something for a lot of guitarists and maybe musicians, which is absent, or is not something that they would even be aware of. And how important do you think it is for young students or older students even to just kind of understand their own set of strengths and weaknesses and musical personalities, and seeing as so many of us as guitarists, like both of us, started on different styles and ended up as classical guitarists, yet we don't really fit into the orchestral world, and even among, a lot of the chamber music kind of culture, and that the guitar is still a bit of a lone wolf, although of course we're much more integrated now. It seems like it's often been the case that we are a little bit on the outside looking in, so necessarily we have to kind of think a bit outside the box, I think. Did you find yourself kind of assessing students as an educator and seeing everybody's individual traits and strengths and weaknesses, and trying to kind of usher them in a direction that would help them in a way, rather than trying to fit the mold of being the international concert guitarist and sort of that very niche and very narrow slot? I think it's important as an educator to kind of assess the student and open their eyes to different options, at least.
Right. Well, I think my teaching style has certainly changed over the years. I mean, I taught at the university for 26, but I mean, I've been a professional musician for well over 35 years now. And I hope I've developed as an instructor. I think earlier on I was, training people to kind of fit into a mold, just because that career path was more open again. But as I've progressed, and one of the things I discovered that people were they were motivated by very, very different things than what inspired me. And that's actually one of the things that I think kind of really drove my curiosity in terms of career development. If I was teaching a piece of music, I mean, one of the things I liked was sort of the theoretical structure of a piece. But not all my students were interested in that. And, some of them, they were inspired because of the emotion that a piece evoked out of them. Some of them like to paint pictures with their music. Some of them like to compose, and it was a vehicle of expression for them. There were some people that were just kind of tech heads, and they were really into the technique, etc. And so there was this palette of interests, and I began to really see that these individuals, like, I was not training them to be a part of an assembly line. These were artists, and that they had to develop who they are, not just as musicians, but as people. And so I think I really started, in my later years, I really started to realize that, artists, everyone is unique. And, not everyone wants to pursue a career in that, but it's, an avocation for them. I was just recently talking to a player who competed in the GFA, and an incredibly talented guy. But, he's also into finance. And so, we were having this discussion, and it was like, oh yeah, you can still be interested in finance, and you can still be a classical guitarist. And all of a sudden you just saw this big weight off of his shoulders. And, it's going to take him a while to figure out the balance and what he's going to do. But to give people permission to follow their desires and instincts, it's critical for a career coach. Because like I say, the traditional career path, though it still exists, is the exception and not the rule.
Definitely. And I think as far as your student goes, I think having an interest in finance is probably a very valuable asset down the road as a musician. Better learned sooner than later, probably as well.
Well, I mean, he was talking to me about Bitcoin and stuff, and right then I was spinning because I thought, holy cow, that's just a world I don't know anything about. But
yeah.
I look at other players, like for example, Mark Ty-Schultz. I mean, he's a lawyer. Most people don't know that, but yeah, I mean, incredibly bright and one of my favorite players personally. But he's also an amazing instructor. But yeah, he has a law degree, and so I'm always. That's another thing that fascinated me was the interplay of different artists, and I think that's another thing that's sort of misguided with a lot of careers is we feel that, we must be solely focused on playing the classical guitar and nothing else exists. And, I began to realize that, music is an expression of life. And if you don't develop a life, you have nothing to say. And, if you don't develop a life that others can resonate with, they can't relate to your music. So, I think as educators, one of the things that we forget is that these are people. These are artists, and they have their own imaginations and their own ideas. And like I say, it's not so much an assembly line. It is about allowing someone to, create themselves. It's like, that famous sculpture where, the man is sort of has the hammer and chisel, and they're pounding away at themselves, and they're carving their own sculpture. And that's really what it is. It's not the instructor. I don't create that student. They create themselves. I'm just a resource to help them with that exercise. And it's quite an honor. And, again, to go back to this idea of the career development, it's not something that I can do for somebody, but I can help them take the steps and figure out what those steps are. I mean, there's a lot of things, yes, that are universal. But at the same time, there's, a lot of things that are unique to that person. And you got to figure out, okay, how are we going to fit all these different pieces together that it makes sense for them?
Oh, yeah, very well put. And, I was thinking about that in my own history as an educator and thinking, with certain students that you can get the sense that, through helping them with guitar and music and understanding that they're really at a certain point in their life, especially for younger students, where they're really learning about themselves, like you said, and the guitar or music is a sort of a vehicle to arrive at that point. And yet, it's interesting also to think about those very talented and very determined and very specifically goal-oriented students as it relates to the guitar and, let's say, doing competitions or recordings or whatever it is, sort of those traditional kind of things that sort of signposts that we would expect as a career classical guitarists. Yet, looking back, it's not always the most talented students that will succeed. Would you agree, Don?
Yeah, matter of fact, I would say they are the exception. There's an old saying that I learned, actually, it was in the context of playing hockey. But it says, hard work beats talent when talent isn't working hard. And, you get some people who are very talented, but they haven't sort of developed the work ethic, but they can go quite a far ways. And then you get those that have this incredible work ethic, and that can take them a ways. But it's, those that are talented and have the work ethic, now those are the superstars. But it's not just talent now. I think that's the message that not just myself, but I think a lot of career coaches are beginning to get out there, is that the idea is that that's just one aspect, and that there is for lack of a better word, a business side to their music making that people need to pay attention to. And most artists are scared of that. And, that probably comes from, things that happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where record labels were really, taking advantage of artists, because artists had no clue of the record deals that they were signing. And, and I think that reputation has continued on, and those bad deals still happen. Now, I know classical guitarists, we don't generally get a record deal. But I think there's a fear about the music industry and about the business side of things. And I actually have a pretty cool little, in one of my presentations, actually, let me just see if I can drag it up, because I think it's worth kind of going through here. So this is, the illustration is actually about a chef. So, let's say you've recently, finished your studies at a famous culinary institute, whether that be in France or Italy or New York, who knows. Now, as a well-trained chef, you acquire all the culinary skills and knowledge regarding, food pairings, and you've learned about various cooking practices, and, you've gained knowledge about foods from different cultures, and, maybe if you've even learned to create a few new dishes yourself, right? So, you pass this rigorous culinary exam, and you now step out into the world, and you have dreams of being a master chef, right? So now, as you leave the safety of the classroom and the familiarity of the school, because it is really a very closed world in some ways. You're in search for your first job, or maybe you're wanting to open up your own restaurant with the intention of making this big splash. So, but here's the thing: what happens if that chef didn't have a kitchen, or the basic appliances such as a stove or a fridge or an oven or a mixer, whatever? Or how would, a chef manage if they didn't have professional knives or, just basic cooking utensils? Now, they're trained, so I would imagine that they could probably whip up a few things that would be quite impressive, but I don't think they would be demonstrating their full potential as a chef. And so, I think their ideas would soon be exhausted. So the utensils and appliances are simply tools that chefs use to create their culinary delights. And so the focus isn't necessarily on the appliances or the utensils, but they are necessary tools in helping them with their craft. And I think, that's kind of the same thing. When you look at the business side of a music career, your career development, that really is, those are the tools that we use. Are not things are meant to take away our creativity or our originality or our individuality. They are just devices that we use to build and promote the artist's music or music-related service. And just like a chef must devote the time to, putting a kitchen together and, or opening up a restaurant, so does a classical guitarist, need to devote some time and energies into building their career. Now, just think about this for a second. If regardless of how good a chef is, if they don't have customers, at a restaurant eating their food, it doesn't matter how good they are. People are not, getting the opportunity to enjoy their talents. So it's, the business side of things, I think it's often seen as confrontational, or it's something that, is taking people away from their art. And one of the messages that I'm trying to help, emerging and developing classical guitarists understand is that these things are here to help them as artists. And they not only help them with their career development, but those things can also help them with their art. And it's kind of a difficult thing to explain, but it's I don't think it's as adversarial or what's the word I'm looking for?
Adversarial, is that?
Thank you. That's it. As people think it is. And yes, you can look at it that way, and those things have happened. But I think if you can change your paradigm and begin to see these things as an asset, as tools that you can use to help you with your career, I think that changes the game a lot.
Very important lesson certainly for younger students as well, I think, is that, understanding that at certain points you do have to deal with all the other facets of life and not just delve into the escapism and beauty of music and guitar playing. And, certainly something that, again, is better learned earlier than later. And, in that regard also, Don, I think these days there are, like you mentioned, the tools available to all of us. And I'm thinking specifically of social media, in the way that we are able to broadcast and get our music out there, but also to advertise ourselves in so many ways now. And despite the fact that it's obviously, it's a major advantage and a great resource for everybody to be able to put our content out and to be able to network in ways that were actually impossible, I think, even 25 years ago, to communicate with somebody across the world who might have happened to see, something on Facebook or whatever. It's really miraculous in a certain sense. And at the same point, I think there's a double-edged sword there, where we know social media is also this kind of trap and can also provide a distorted view of, I think, what's out there, and maybe even kind of give us a distorted view of how we are perceived, or in the way that we perceive ourselves, perhaps. And we could certainly waste a lot of time, just on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And this is all time that can also be spent on your craft, right? Or actually going out and meeting somebody in person. Actually, we were talking, we started recording about just the beauty and kind of the simplicity of being in the same space and sharing, eye contact and having those kind of physical but meaningful gestures. What are your thoughts on kind of this explosion of resources available to all of us versus kind of the traditional model of, I remember going out and going into restaurants and shaking hands and putting up posters around the community for guitar teachers, and this sort of a little bit more old school, but I kind of was on the bridge, I think, in between these sort of the old ways and sort of this newer way, which I'm still honestly struggling with a little bit. I really try to limit what I do on social media and make it just really pertinent to professional activities only. And, I wonder sometimes if I'm not taking full advantage of that, but I do think that there's this danger of falling into spending just hours and hours on your phone and, really kind of straying away from your original intention. So it's a big topic, Don, but I'm curious to know your thoughts on kind of this new age of social media.
Yeah, well, if you look at different areas of a classical guitarist career, which actually probably could apply to, most musicians, and but you have the area of marketing, and that has changed through the years. The tools and the medium. You used to put an ad in a paper, putting up posters around. And by the way, they still work. But there are new tools, social media. And so I think it's understanding marketing and what the purposes are. A lot of the time, I think where artists kind of get stuck is they think, well, gee, I'm just going to throw spaghetti at the wall and hope someone likes it. That's probably not a very strategic way of doing things. So even someone like yourself who has an interest in 20th and 21st century music, there are other people like that. And so, one of the big things is that you don't sit back and hope that someone waits for, you don't sit back and wait and hope that someone discovers you or your music. You, as an artist, you can go out and find your audience. So that is a very kind of proactive approach to things. Is it easy? No. Is it time consuming? Yes, it is. But I think if you use social media as a way to connect with people, as rather than just these are individuals that are faceless and I'm hoping that they support me, I don't think that's a very good strategy, and it ends up on a lot of disappointment. But for example, if you went out and let's say, you had your Facebook page or whatever, or Instagram or whatever it is, WhatsApp, and you go and you say, hey, I'm interested in 20th and 21st century music. Anybody else out there? And you start making connections, and I says, oh, you like this, so do I. What do you think of this? And, artists were building relationships. And, that when you're building relationships, you're building a market. And that's what business is. But again, I think we sort of get, it's easy to cross over to the dark side, if you will. And, we're so focused on getting followers or likes, and we're not connecting with people. And that's the danger. I think social media is great because, when the internet was introduced, when the internet became commercial in the sense of that, I think in the late 1990s, the internet was becoming accessible to all of us. I think the internet, surfaced in the late 80s, actually, if I'm not mistaken. But, it started to become a universal thing in the late 90s. And, that changed the music industry dramatically, because we no longer needed the record labels to have access to our market. And the record labels and the recording industry were crying the blues, because all of a sudden their monopoly was taken away from them. And it really changed the industry. Now, as artists, we now have direct access to our fans. And that's a beautiful thing. It's also a very overwhelming thing. So, yes, it's a wonderful tool, but you have to understand why it is you're there and, what you're doing with it. If you are just throwing spaghetti against the wall, probably going to be a very frustrating experience. But if you are there to connect with people, and when I say connect with people is, have relationships, even if it's a virtual one, but the idea is, there's shared interests or shared experiences. Then you've got people who are interested in what you're doing. And then you are, you are looking at your music and saying, well, how can my music help this other person in their journey? And when I think you sort of have that focus and that mindset, it becomes a different game. But there are people who specialize in marketing, and that's a whole different world, just as there's people who specialize in concert promotion and recording. When you look at, community building and branding, I mean, those are all specialized areas. But, here's the thing, when you don't have a record label or a manager or anything like that, the artist needs to do those things. But that's part of any business. It's not just, writers, actors, sculptors, painters, they all have to do that. That's, I think in some way actors are a little bit lucky in the sense of that they always have to be auditioning to get, work. And I think in their training, it's sort of part of their fiber that, they're thinking about, these things about, getting headshots and, having websites and all those things, where, as a musician, you can hide in your closet and, you can still function as an artist, but the frustration is that your music isn't being heard. And I think this even applies to people who may be, very talented, but they're not pursuing music as their primary vocation. It's an avocation. There was a really cool article, and I'd highly recommend you reading it and your listeners reading it. It's probably from a dozen years ago. It's from the Globe and Mail, and it was an article of what they called professional amateurs. I don't remember the title exactly, but it was basically, these were people who, let's say they went to music school and then they became a doctor or a lawyer, or they went into a different field. They became an accountant, but they still love to play, and they play at a very high level. And, they would play in a string quartet or, a duo or something. And no, maybe they're not playing every weekend, but, maybe they play once every 3 months, but they play just as well as someone who, makes a full-time living from it. But, that's their place in their music. But even those individuals, you need to form relationships with people who, can vibe with you. And, when you start doing that, then you start finding a community. And when you start building a community, you begin to learn about them, and you begin to discover that, hey, there are some certain needs, and there are certain things that I do that maybe I can contribute to this community. And I think if you start looking at things from that kind of mindset, those activities become more enjoyable. They become more human.
Yeah, and I think you're right in that it's important to embrace the fact that as musicians, we do have to wear a lot of different hats, and whether it's managing, scheduling, accounting, the advertising, teaching, performing, practicing, writing grants, all of these things. We are, as you mentioned, we are running a small business, and, the sooner we can kind of understand that and just accept all of the responsibilities, actually the more time we're going to have to really focus on our craft, right? And we're not going to feel like these things are distractions or impedances. In fact, all of the networking, although you might not see all of the benefits immediately, like you said, you're building a network, you're creating, a community of people that you can trust and that you also have a mutual trust with. Well, I wanted to ask you actually, Don, a little bit about also your work with the Fraser Acoustic Guitar Festival running for some time. You founded it, I believe, and I think a while ago. Yeah. What is the status of the festival? Also, what led you to start the festival? Was it always so inclusive in that it incorporated, again, these elements of fingerstyle, acoustic, and different, I think even world music and flamenco guitar, as well as classical?
Well, in my early days at what was then Kwantlen College, there was three of us. We went around to all the high schools, just basically introducing ourselves, and sort of saying, hey, we're here. And I think there was about 40 high schools in our catchment area at the time. And I personally went to about 20 of them. And I went there just with the sole purpose of finding out who they are, what they do. It wasn't like, hey, send your students to college. I was more interested in what they do, and I was learning about the community that I was in. And much to my surprise, there were a number of schools who had guitar programs of some kind. Some were incredibly elementary, and some were well established. And the feedback I was getting from the teachers was, we have these choir festivals. We go to jazz band, festivals, in Idaho or, in Edmonton, and, we do these things in Whistler, but we have nothing for guitar. And after about the 10th time I heard that, my thought was, hey, I'm in a position to do something about that. So I started a festival to celebrate the acoustic guitar. And the reason why I limited it to the acoustic guitar is there's a lot of things for the electric guitar, and less so for the acoustic guitar. And so, but it also reflected what I was doing at the university. I love the electric guitar. I think a brilliant player like nowadays is like John Mayer. I think he's an incredibly tasteful player, musically speaking. But I just, I was a classical guitarist. I loved fingerstyle acoustic guitar playing, and I loved flamenco and Celtic, etc. And I thought, okay, even though I don't have a background in some of those styles, I think those are things that are related. And I also knew that just as a musician who gigged a lot at the time. I played with an amazing violinist. I played with several just incredible people, but a couple of them played jazz violin, and I could read jazz charts. I know as a guitarist, the more diverse you are, the more work you're going to get. So, and also, I wasn't always inspired by the classical guitar. I love the music, but I like what James Taylor does. I like what Don Hlus does. There's just a diversity of music out there, and it's all very inspiring. So, and that seemed to, embrace most of what was happening in the high schools. Most of them had acoustic guitar programs. And there was the odd exception, but for the most part, that was what was happening. And I thought, okay, I can set something up. And the first year, I had 80 students come out. And I think a lot of people were quite blown away that I had 80 students. I had no idea what to expect. And at the time, it was just, okay, this seems to be something that is needed. And I just started making more and more connections with people. And, eventually there was over the 23-year period, I think, there ended up being definitely over 50 high schools that had a guitar program of some kind. It might have been even close to 60, I don't recall. And I know the Guitar Festival had an impact in that growth. It sort of legitimized a high school teacher going up and saying, well, hey, I want to start a guitar program. We can go to this festival. And I think it really helped open the doors for a lot of guitar enthusiasts who taught in high school. And, one of the things that was quite shocking to me was just the wide range of abilities that guitar teachers had. I remember there was one high school, one teacher had developed the program and it was really successful. And, but the music program as a whole got too big. So that instructor, that teacher went and, did the band and choir classes. And the principal found that, okay, I understand that, you own a guitar. You're the most qualified person to teach. You are now getting 5 blocks of guitar. And they barely played the instrument. So the other thing that I wanted to do was help high school teachers make connections with other teachers and share resources and ideas about, what they can do. And sometimes I gave workshops for the teachers. Sometimes it was, one of the high school teachers that had a very thriving program, and they would, share some of the things that they were doing. Excuse me. So it just started growing from there. And in my 5th year, I kind of, I was surprised, I was getting like 200 kids out for the day. And I just thought, you know what, maybe I'm going to bring in a guest artist. And I invited Don Hlus to come. And, there was a thing in the paper, and this was just a day event. It was for the high school students. But my office phone was ringing off the wall because people were wanting to get tickets. And that's when the first purpose was to kind of help the high school teachers build their programs and to give students who were potential students for the university an opportunity to play for their peers and learn from local professionals, etc. So when I invited Don, he was kind of the first guest artist, if you will, of kind of an international scale. And, like I say, people were contacting me saying, where can I get tickets? I'd love to go, hear him. And, I was apologetic and sort of saying, well, this is it's during the daytime and, he's playing for and working with students. So I realized that a third goal was, or the second goal was to give people in the community, just the general community that we were in, an opportunity to hear world-class talent in their own backyard. So I started inviting different people in. And, I've been very lucky. I've had people like Jason Vio, Anna Vidovic, Muriel Anderson, Michael Chapdelaine, Andrew York, and a host of local players. I always tried to support local players as well. Usually in the feature concert, the format is that I would, two local players would share the first half, and then the international artist would play the second half of the concert. And so I was trying to support local artists. And then, of course, because I was getting international artists it gave my students an opportunity to work with these artists. And, one of my favorite moments was one year I invited Andrew York to come. And I had everybody learn an Andrew York piece. And, he came and he was blown away because he said, everybody's afraid to play my music for me. And so we had an afternoon masterclass where all the students played an Andrew York piece. And the stuff that he shared that's not on the score, but were integral to the piece, they all came out. And you really got a really good sense of what, how he approached things and the things he likes and, some of these little idiomatic things that, he took great pleasure in. You got to learn those things. And the festival ended up having, like I say, sort of a three-prong approach where there was potential students and students who, just love music and the guitar. And it was, helping high school teachers out with their programs. And then, like I say, for my university students to work with international artists. And then finally, an opportunity for the community to listen. And, one of my favorite stories, I don't know, this would have been, 9 or 10 years into this. And this elderly woman came up to me at intermission. And she says, about 5 years ago, my friends, and she used the word, dragged me out to a concert. And she was thinking, oh my goodness, what kind of concert is this that, this is being held in Langley? Like, this is going to be a dreadful evening. And she reluctantly went. And she explained that was one of the best concerts she'd ever attended in her lifetime. And she had been back every year since. She said she never knows who these artists are, but she says they've always been brilliant. She said, thank you. And before I even had a chance to say anything, she just walked away. And yeah, that's a pretty cool feeling, you know. And I think and that's what it was all about, it's just creating a connection and an opportunity for people. And, that was my approach. I'm what you would call someone does a soft sell in terms of marketing. I don't sort of stand up on a soapbox and say, listen to my music, or, come to the university. And it was more of the ideas as I presented services and opportunities for people to enjoy and to learn from. And if it resonated with them, some of them came to the university. And I was very grateful for their trust in me to help them with their journey. So, the festival went for 22, 23 years, and I left the university and COVID hit. And it's been on hold for a couple of years. I don't know. It takes a lot of energy. One of the things I'm very proud of, the university provided a space for me. So I didn't have, to pay for a concert hall. But everything else was cost recovery and didn't cost the university a dime. And, that was the thing that I think, I was very proud of. That wasn't, I didn't apply for grants or anything. I felt like, okay, if this is worthwhile, it'll support itself. And that's not to say that, applying for grants is wrong. That's certainly not the case. That's for many artists, that's an important element of supporting them. But it's just the way it worked out. So, with COVID being what it is right now, I probably won't entertain doing anything until that kind of subsides. But it would also mean kind of building up my community again, which I don't know if I have the energy, to be quite frank. But, maybe if there was a team of people. I think, one of the things, I did it on my own, and that was because I wanted to do things that were different. I mean, yes, I had classical guitarists, I had Celtic guitarists, I had studio musicians come in. I had different types of artists, all orientated around the acoustic guitar or the classical guitar. And I know a lot of people in the classical guitar community kind of look down upon that, but I guess I really didn't care, because I felt that I'm from the school of Duke Ellington. There's two types of music: good music and bad music. Stylistic, I mean, there's stuff that's great by the Beatles, and there's stuff that's not so good by them, but it's kind of like Bach, Beatles, and Basie, the three Bs is what I call it. And I think I took that approach because one of the things that I learned about my students is I didn't know where their art was going to take them. Mm-hmm. So I could, and I think a lot of the things that are happening with career development, to kind of weave these different topics together, is that, there's this traditional career path that was becoming more and more obsolete, or for the selected few. And I think, from there, I was trying to kind of say, okay, well, there are many, many, many other opportunities there. You just have to look out into your community and, kind of see what's there, and then look at your own skill sets and kind of think, hey, okay, this is the need, and this is something I can do. And so it's a mindset of service. And I think that's just a different approach to, but it's not just service to others. I think it's also service to yourself. Because even if you are a musician where it is not your vocation, it is your avocation. It's the principal activity you do outside of your, main occupation. Even if, like someone like myself, who we play for ourselves, that's not really true. We still want to be heard. Maybe it's not by 500 people, maybe it's by 5 people. But, we play because we want to be heard in some way. That's an aspect of us. And so, whether you want to play for 5 people or 500 people, it doesn't really matter. I think the idea is finding your community and seeing how your talents, how your skills, how your knowledge can contribute to that community. And so that it allows you to grow as an artist, and it makes the world a better place for others.
I think that's a great parting thought, Don. And it was really great to hear about the history of the Acoustic Guitar Festival. I'll just say that, I was very aware and supportive of the festival while it was running. And I was always also, very impressed with the diversity. And I, like you mentioned, I was always kind of the mindset that the more exposure for the classical guitar involving all of these other disciplines and styles is only better for the health of and development of the classical guitar. After all, a lot of us just happened to hear a recording at some point that kind of captured our imagination, or maybe we're lucky enough to see a performer in concert. So I can imagine being, a high school student in Langley or in the surrounding area and just happening upon this festival and discovering something life-changing. Really, I think that's so important.
I think it was my 15th year. And I had invited all these international artists. And this one particular year, I decided I am going to feature 4 local artists as the featured concert. So I didn't have an international name to draw people in. And at this point in time, like the auditorium held 255 people, and I would sell like 245 tickets to the evening concert. So not quite as sellout. And it's like, but I had a lot of local artists come and do workshops for the students. And I thought, you know what? I need to show the community that there are some incredible people here. And they're in their backyard. But because they're here, we don't pay attention to them. So I had Don Alder, I had David Sinclair, I had Daniel Bolshoi, classical guitar. So Don Alder is a fingerstyle, steel string, sort of percussive player. David Sinclair is one of these versatile players, a studio musician that if you heard an album recorded in the 70s and 80s, he was probably on it. Just an incredibly kind and talented individual. I had Daniel Bolshoi, who's new to the community, but a classical guitarist of international caliber. And I'm trying to think who the 4th player was. It might have been Victor Kolsty, a flamenco guitarist. But, it was the first time that the evening concert sold out. I was thrilled and I was sort of blown away. And I sort of like, okay, this one's rattling my brain because there's not an international, like, player from far away coming into town. It's 4 local players. So I think at that point, the audience was trusting that what I was doing was going to be good. And, I had a number of people come up to me after and they say, I came to hear, David Sinclair, or I came to hear, Don Alder play. But quite frequently, the comment was, but the classical guitarist, wow, I couldn't believe what he could do with the guitar. And, so by honoring different tastes, they were open to what I had to share or organize. So, yeah, I think sometimes, we get so tunnel vision, we have blinders on. And it was really cool to see how it was, if you tell students, he says, you have to learn classical guitar, it's good for you. That's like shoving Brussels sprouts down someone's throat and saying, eat your Brussels sprouts, it's good for you, right? Most people won't do that. But if you discover, well, to me, Brussels sprouts is always awful, but if you give them broccoli and all of a sudden, but if you let them discover the taste of broccoli, all of a sudden they kind of go, hey, this is really cool. This is very different. And that's really what I was as an educator. I was really just a person who showed people doors. Maybe I could open them, but they had to walk through them. And because in the end, they're responsible for their journey, not me. But their success is their success. And it's nice to have been able to contribute to it, but I was really just a small part of their success. And, it's been very satisfying.
Well, that's a great story. And I want to thank you today, Don, for sharing all of your knowledge and your experience as an educator and your thoughts on kind of how this whole landscape has changed and is continuing to change for young artists. And I think it's just something that's very, very important, as I mentioned. Before we wrap up, where can we learn a little bit more about your research and your activities? Do you have a website? Are you active on social media?
Actually, I have 3 websites.
Okay, good.
The first is donhlusmusic.com. That's my personal site, but that has links to all my other ones. The one on career development is called Classical Guitar Career Masterclass.com. And my teaching studio is fortlangleyguitarstudio.com. So, but if you go to my one site, there's actually donhlusmusic.com. If you go to that one, on the main page at the bottom, there are links to my other pages. So, that's where people can find me. And I really appreciate the time that you gave me, Adrian, to kind of share a little bit of my experience and giving me an opportunity, I guess, to take another step in my journey in terms of helping others with theirs. And I hope that your listeners find this informative and that they've really gotten something that's helped them on their journey. And so I thank you again for that opportunity. It's been a real pleasure and an honor, and nice to finally connect with you again. It's been a while. I remember interviewing you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
To get on the interview inventory at Kwantlen. Unfortunately, we could never kind of utilize your services, but.
Well, I can say I want to thank you for those opportunities when I first moved to Vancouver, and you had me come down to Kwantlen to do a couple of gigs, also to do a master class. So, I was very grateful for that. And despite the interview, I did appreciate the opportunity. So nevertheless, it was really a pleasure to talk with you today, Don, and great to catch up. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experience. I know that my students are going to benefit a lot, and they're going to see a link to your career development website on our next course outline as well, because I think that's just such a vital aspect of developing as a musician. So thank you again, and all the best in this new year with everything.
Thank you, and all the best to you and all those that are in your circle. I wish you the very best in 2022, and I look forward to watching your artistic endeavors. And you've always been doing very interesting and edgy stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing what else you bring forth this coming year.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, pleasure.
Okay. All right. Have a good one.